So performance of the sector for the first couple of months, and this is the operational performance. The financial performance we will be taking at the 3-month stage, and we will be sending that information around to the board in around about the middle of August for a review prior to publishing that data in August, rather than waiting until the September board meeting. But it clearly it's just simply not ready because it's an end of June quarter. Elizabeth,
Yeah.
kick off on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So this, as has been described, we're looking at operational performance for the first 2 months of the year. It's probably most helpful to turn to the appendix as we talk through this. So appendix 2, which describes in quite a lot of detail the sustained operational challenges that we are continuing to experience and are adversely affecting performance of the provider sector. At Appendix 1 there's a very high level summary, but what I was going to propose doing, if it's helpful to the board, was just go through some of the key metrics and key guidance in this first one. So initially on, if you look at 1.1, we're looking at A&E performance. So further pressures in A&E, largely due to the sustained levels of demand. So this is attendances and emergency admissions. At previous boards we talked about this being a bit of a blip. I think we've actually seen this increase in demand continue, and it's now becoming more of a trend. So it started at during Q3 and Q4, and it continues to rise. It is worth highlighting actually that in May 2016 you can see the number of attendances to A&E, and this is the second highest level of attendances ever recorded. The first highest number was actually in April, so you can see the sustained pressure the service is struggling to manage. We failed the target in April. Performance was actually at 89.3% compared to 88.9%, so despite this improvement, performance is remaining significantly below the 95% target that we've seen. One of the questions that come out through the reset actually has been around, are we actually saying that that we're not trying to achieve the 95% target? That's clearly not the case at all. And the target remains for all providers to achieve the 95% target, but we are realistic about the level of demand and pressure that's going through the service, and we recognise the baseline for all of the providers as well. So what we've got put in place is improvement trajectories for all providers across a range of targets, and we're working very closely with them to ensure that those are achieved, and to assist them in wherever possible overachieving those. So those are just the minimum standards that we would expect in respect of they won't actually be fined if they didn't achieve the 95%. So I think that's been widely accepted and supportive and signed off by both commissioners and providers as a sensible way forward. We've also got a number of initiatives, and I believe if it hasn't gone out today, it's going out later this week. We've got a letter going out on our A&E plan, and that's looking at targeting all aspects of the pathway, because clearly what we need to do is reduce demand going through A&E, and also to free up, ensure that flow through the hospital is accelerated, and also to accelerate discharge. And until we do that, we're going to continue to see this pressure within these hospitals.
Sorry, before you move on, on that last point, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is what you were referring to in the last sentence there,
Yeah.
is it? So are we, as NHSI, going to be engaging in or taking a leadership role in relation to specific pilots or experiments or new models, or what does that mean really in terms of managing demand and improving flow?
So we're working specifically with the ESIP team, which is in the report, on looking at these 40 most challenged health systems.
Yes.
And then in addition to that, the A&E pilot, there are a number of initiatives at certain parts of the pathway that NHSI and NHSE will be working very closely with providers to enable them to tackle their own discrete issues and look for common themes and common approaches.
And will we be able to reach beyond the provider? You know, for instance, to look at GP opening.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We're going
Yeah.
down and we're going up and
Yeah.
looking at, yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. So when we talk about the pathway, it's not just the pathway through
Within the hospital,
hospital.
it's at the front door and at the exit,
Exit
as
as
it
well.
were. Yeah,
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a really important point that Laura makes, and it's why I said what I said at the start, because agenda item 17, which talks about the drivers of
Yeah.
A&E performance, is
Yeah.
an absolutely fantastic analysis, and we'll come to it later. But you know, that is one paper that I firmly believe, with your consent, we should consider putting up onto the our
Absolutely.
website, because it talks about the underlying root causes of the issues facing our providers, and I think it's important it's outlined.
I mean, the thing that absolutely comes out of that paper is a 20% increase over 4 to 5 years in emergency admissions. And it's quite staggering.
Well, we'll come to it later on, but I really did think it was an excellent paper, and when I see, you know, 29%, older patients are 29% more likely to use A&E than they were 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I think we've got some very, very challenging dynamics going across the whole of our health and care system, which
Yeah.
we need to understand and collectively deal with. So we will come back to it. Sorry
Okay.
to labour the point, but I will want that on the website.
Can I just add one more point on before we move on from page 1, which is I just think we should, as a board, notice that trolley weight number, because the 60% increase in people waiting longer than 4 hours on a trolley, that's a bad
Yeah.
thing to be happening, and I don't want to think that we just glibly passed over it. That's a real problem.
Yeah.
Let's keep going on this.
Okay.
Take it though that we have read
Okay, yeah.
the paper, so we don't need to go
Okay.
through
High
just
level then.
highlights.
So highlights then. So diagnostic waiting times, we are failing the target with 1.4% against the 1% target. However, this is the second best performance since November 2013. So it's worth highlighting that there's been a big improvement, as is outlined in the document, around endoscopy. So there's been a lot of work going on with a national programme to identify extra capacity, and this we start to see we're seeing the impact of this now. As I say, best performance we've seen for some time. Elective waiting times, again we failed the target in May, 91.56 against the 92% target, a slight improvement from April. Clearly here, again, looking at demand within a hospital setting, so we got a growth in referrals that is completely outstripping capacity. So the big focus now is on reducing GP referrals, and we've obviously got an RTT plan, action plan that we've been working again with NHS England about, and I would go back to the paper that we're going to look at in the private board as well, about how we might work collectively to manage that better. Should I keep going? Yep.
Can I just ask,
Yep.
the 8 providers who are not reporting, I think we've seen a number like that before. I mean, is there a consistent problem, or are they different people?
They're
for
different
reasons?
providers, yeah, they're different providers. So some have been removed from the list, and then more recently we've had some that have had to be added.
Okay.
So it is a change in moving over time. Cancer waiting times, the 2-week wait referral for patients with breast symptoms was not met. So we achieved 92% against the 93% target, and on the 62-day cancer was not achieved for the 5th consecutive month. So that's 81.4% against the 85% target. We did actually achieve all of the cancer waiting times. We have improvement trajectories, and we are working very closely with those providers that have failed, and we're working also with the Cancer Task Force. You know, Kathy are actively involved with the action plans and work that we're doing there. So we're supporting those providers again. This will feed in from some of the diagnostics where we are actually developing this extra capacity that should help us with cancer waiting times going forward. I can keep going, or
No,
yeah, or should I?
Again, we'll come back overall that
Yeah, okay. On the only other thing then I'd like to highlight on ambulance response times is it looks like a very sorry tale. The one thing I would like to highlight is there are a lot of pilots going on. So there are dispatch on disposition going on in 6 trusts, and we've got 2 ambulance trusts that are actually changing the way that they clinically code. So when you look at this data, it's actually not very comparable. So what I would ask the board is to obviously this is the data that the trust is currently preparing and sharing with us, although it's not comparable when you look at it over a time series. The outcome of the pilot should be known going through to the autumn, and we are expecting it to change the way that we measure ambulance response rates.
Richard.
Just a couple of comments and a question. I think overall it sort of still paints a quite depressing picture, and yet most things still seem to be on a downward trajectory. So I think the key thing for us is to really focus on what the improvement trajectories are. Are they realistic? What do we really expect to happen properly? I know we'll come on to that later on, but what we don't want clearly is over-optimistic trajectories that are then not met, 'cause we've seen that before. But actually we do need to see something that starts to change the shape of this curve. And I guess my second comment was on the presentation, because it's quite difficult to see trends if you sort of compare one month with another. So the paper does comment about things have improved from March to April. Well, I guess the question they sort of normally would, I think, between March and April in a number of these areas. And I think now it's important we get what's the underlying trend that's happening here, what's the rolling averages, how does it compare with the previous year. So you can see the point at which things potentially do start to turn. I think it's worth maybe looking at the presentation of that.
Yeah.
And the only final thing on the presentation was we're still in some of this in the one of the actions we still separate out FTs and trusts. It might be just easier to bring all that together.
The point on the improvement trajectories. So in order to access the STF fund, you have to have improvement trajectories across a number of these key metrics. There is an inherent tension there about having something that is improving, an improvement trajectory for every single provider that is challenging and realistic. And that has to be signed off by a commissioner. So invariably it is going to be challenging. So I think there's enough tension in the system that those are realistic, that the providers realise if they don't deliver them, they won't be able to access the STF, but challenging enough that commissioners are trying absolutely to get the best for patients as well. So I believe that we've got that right, and all of the improvement trajectories against all of these key headlines, there's progress, and we can show at a point in time then when they're going to be delivered in aggregate. So I'm comfortable with that. Around the presentation, for the full quarterly reports, because this is more of a snapshot, it always shows what's happened for the same period in the previous financial year. But I'm very happy to start including that in the month report if it's helpful. We haven't looked at rolling averages in this report, but we could do that.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on a few of the comments there. I think the link with this and the document later on the drivers, and I think there's some really good stuff in there. And our plan is an attempt to try and use the evidence we've got of what's driving demand, and also then where are organisations finding solutions and finding a way of coping with that. One thing that does worry me though is, as Elizabeth pointed out, we do seem to be running at really escalated levels of demand still. So something changed last year and then changed again at the turn of the year that has massively increased A&E flow, and that's had an impact on ambulance flow and performance and hospital flow. And we're going to start this next week to review our plan, and you'll just launch the plan effectively, but review the plan in the context of, so for me, if you look at the daily operational statistics that aren't refined for publication for quite a long time yet, but July's running very hot again, so it looks like it's going to be another really, really busy month. And there's this very clear link in some parts of the country to school holidays there, and it looks like in some parts of the country a very clear link to primary care access issues again, which was a big issue in January. So some organisations that we talked before, like Luton, have found solutions to that, and others are really struggling with it still. And I think it's our job to just try and get underneath that. What's the cause? How does it fit with your trajectory? Has somebody else found a solution? If not, are there any others? And it's no longer as simple as everybody just does the same thing and pushes harder. The system has changed and we don't fully understand how it's changed, but the dynamics and the drivers have changed really dramatically.
Notwithstanding the point Elizabeth made on ambulance response times, in the same way that the last board meeting we asked for what are the underlying drivers of ED performance, I'd quite like to suggest that we have a piece of work done on what are the underlying drivers of ambulance performance, because there's no doubt that they are short of where we need to be, however you measure it. And I just sense that we ought to try and get underneath that, because there's seems to be some things which are diverting ambulances and increasing volumes. And I think it's helpful if the board understand what they are. So could I ask, through you, Jim, that somebody brings back to the next board meeting a paper on the underlying drivers of ambulance performance?
Will do. And on that note, Miles is actually working with the ambulance sector on where they think they should go in the future. So there's a bit of work going there. I'll ask Miles to lead that work, and if we can, we'll incorporate that as a sort of series from pressures to what does the future look like in the future.
Do you want to cover 2.1 or finance update?
Yeah, sure. So there's a brief update, as you described, Chairman, on finance, and it is more around the plan resubmission process that we have to enact. So we issued the clarity around the STF guidance, and the conversations were still going on around control totals. And I'm pleased that we've now got a final plan that's been received, that was being received at the same time as month 2 results were coming in, that confirm that 90% of providers, so 214 in total, have now accepted a control total. This actually compared to around about 142 earlier in the year, so good progress being made there. The net deficit, however, for the sector stands at £580 million, so after full receipt of the £1.8 billion. So whilst this is an improvement on the initial plan, because we were at 704 to start, clearly there's still further work to do, hence the reset document and follow-up discussions that we're having with the service.
Yeah. To which we'll return later on. Okay, any other questions on performance?
Does the 508, what does the 580 million assume about the 24 who haven't yet accepted the control total? Do you assume their control totals even though they haven't
No, so
accepted them?
I'm hoping that as we work closely with those 24, we will improve on the 580 million. So that currently assumes the plans that they've submitted.
So it's a worst case for them?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
So
helpful. Okay.
plans received but not accepted.
Okay, fine, thank you.
And just on that point, there's been a bit of tension about, so I've signed up and I'm trying really hard. What about these people who haven't signed up? Are they going to get a better deal? And what we're working very hard on, it's incredibly complex, is making sure that there's a consistency of stretch, and that colleagues know that if they're working very hard in organisation A, it's similar in organisation B, and there's no, nobody's getting an easy ride in any of this. There's no easy way out of it. But we're also not going beyond that and stretching people unreasonably, which is just, frankly, a lot of really heavy work with individual organisations, isn't it? So that'll be a continued tension as the months unfold.
But I think it's worth highlighting that whilst it still is 580 million, these are the aggregate positions of board-approved plans by providers that would have been quality impact assessed to be submitted to us.
But this time last year, what was that number? And how did it turn out? In other words, how good are they at it?
That number this time last year was 2.1 billion deficit.
And the outturn?
The outturn ended up being 2.45.
Thank you. Comforting.
Yes, we do have the 1.8.
Yes, but I'm thinking more it's the ability to forecast, actually, was what I was after. So that's, that's about 10 or 12%. Yeah.
And whilst we've got the 1.8 billion within those numbers, we know that we've got the providers are stretching harder than just a pound for pound on the STF because of the underlying position.
But let's be absolutely clear, this is incredibly tough.
Absolutely very
Incredibly
challenging,
stretching.
high risk.
Full of financial risk,
Yeah.
particularly off the back of what Jim and Ruth and I know Kathy believes about maintaining quality standards and not taking risks. This is challenging and requires quite a lot of support, but a lot of work from board down through all of the trusts in the country. And some of these plans are back-end loaded,
Yes.
some of these savings. So we've got to be very vigilant on the tracking. Okay, thank you very much. And you will come back with the full first quarter at the next board meeting.